We're so happy to have you here at Aquinas Institute with all of us. We want to thank most especially here our beautiful center here for community engagement and evangelization for helping us to organize our event tonight to honor our great Vincentian priest, Father Dan Harris, and for his great work of preaching, and especially here in our collection A Year of Vincentian Preaching. To start our event, I'd actually like to welcome my supervisor, Father Greg, who really was the inspiration, the catalyst, and one of the people who said, I know Dan from my experience of working with him, and I think this is a project that's not only going to benefit us here at Aquinas, but really benefit the larger community that knew him.
I knew that Dan, and I was amazed and really admired Dan for the fact that throughout his priesthood, not only did he teach preaching in seminaries in St. Louis, in Chicago, in Denver, in Los Angeles, but he also, every Sunday, preached in a parish.
What do Roman Catholics want of their priests/deacons the most? Holiness. What do Roman Catholics want of their preachers the most? Holiness. But that is absolutely, fundamentally Dan Harris.
And as I think of Father Dan, and the word joyful has been, said so many times, he was a truly joyful teacher. He was hospitable. He welcomed us into the classroom. He welcomed us in one-on-one conversations that he had with every student, watching a video of our preaching. He invited us into his heart, and he invited us into the Word of God.
I have never felt uncomfortable preaching, and I've been a priest 37 years. And he set me free, but he was brutally honest. And it was about being who you are and enjoying it and enjoying being a preacher. And I do think that's one of the big gifts he gave me.
Dan loved the story. I lived with Dan over on nearby on Arsenal Street, and Dan, he loved to listen to people's stories and try to find out new stories to use. And there are a lot of stories in the book, or snippets of stories. So one of his habits was at supper every night he'd say, "No talk of business. We cannot talk business." So I'd always come home with lots of stories about Aquinas, but no talk about business. And he would say, he would listen to everybody else for their stories. And so we had men from various apostolates, and they would tell stories. After a while I figured out that he really wanted to hear people's stories so he could incorporate them in his preaching.
What I noticed, especially in reading Dan's preaching, and it might be the way that you pulled out certain themes, was one, he really did see homiletic preaching as leading to the Eucharistic table. So like every homily ends somehow pointing to the table. The other thing that I noticed in his preaching that I hadn't quite noticed as a theme before reading the book was how he engaged the Old Testament with such a profound respect for the Jewish people and such a deep love for the prophets. And that was where I most saw his Vincentian core.
He's an example of that sort of preacher who had the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in another. So those themes, the Old Testament prophetic themes, I didn't know it until I was going through these preachings either, how deeply committed, and this was a Vincentian quality in him, to social justice he was. And he had a way of speaking to it in very ordinary, honest terms that did not polarize.
And one of the things that I kept pulling out was the preacher as listener. And I think that goes back to Father Tom, your story. Like, he wanted to know everyone's stories, and he always made sure that we were listening as preachers, that we were listening to the community, to the world, all of those things. And then he also, the so what, that was always the kind of at the end of our preaching evaluations. So what? We talked about what is the focus and the function of your preaching. Can you say it in one sentence? What do you want people to hear, and what do you want people to take away from your preaching today?
Dan applied the word gently to others, including himself. When he preached, he considered himself a part of the community hearing that word. And he dealt with himself, I think, as a broken human being who was learning and being converted by the word, but always gently. I always feel that when Dan preaches, you're safe.
He knew Christ, he loved Christ, he knew the people that he was serving and preaching to, he loved the people he was serving and preaching to, and he brought all that together in his life and in his teaching and his ministry and his preaching, and that's what I hope people remember about him.
There's just such a layer of mystery to it. And that Dan was given to each of us. The mystery of faith and the vocation is kind of what lingers with me.
We have a job, and you have a job, each and every one of us, in how we speak. So I think Dan's example, and the example of so many who have shared the word with us, inspire me and hope they inspire you to be a messenger of hope and be that messenger who changes the narrative. And that, sisters and brothers, does change the world.